The courthouse in Summit County buzzed with energy as hundreds of people gathered in anticipation of a trial that promised more than mere legal squabbles. The audience, a mix of local residents, curious onlookers, and relentless reporters, filled every available seat. Overhead, portable satellite dishes and camera crews pointed their lenses skyward, eager to capture every moment of what was billed as an extraordinary confrontation between the man they knew as the legendary Dick Van Dyke and the forces of corporate greed. Before we dive deeper into this tale, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know where you're tuning in from, and if stories like this resonate with you, consider subscribing to our channel. Tomorrow, we have another special narrative waiting just for you. Dick Van Dyke, no longer merely a silver screen icon, stood resolutely at the plaintiff's table. His appearance was calm and measured, his eyes reflecting a lifetime of on-screen heroism now repurposed for a battle of real-world justice. Rumors had swirled all around. Some said that Dick, despite his storied career in movies, was unprepared for a courtroom drama. Others whispered that he possessed an unexpected brilliance when it came to legal matters. Yet, as the proceedings began, it became clear that the man in the worn leather jacket and well-polished fedora was no actor improvising lines. He was a man fighting for what was right. Opposing him was Victor Marshall, a suave and ambitious real estate developer who had made a name for himself by turning neglected properties into lavish condos. His high-powered defense attorney, Carson Knight, exuded the cool arrogance of a corporate lawyer who had seen countless cases and believed no ordinary man could outwit the legal machine. Victor Marshall's company was accused of encroaching on land that Dick had purchased long ago in the picturesque coastal town of Bayview Cove, a small piece of paradise that had become the backdrop of both his personal memories and this historic legal dispute. As the courtroom quieted and Judge Harrison Brooks entered, his seasoned gaze swept the room. Brooks was a man whose decades on the bench had taught him not to take any case lightly. Today, though, he could not have anticipated the quiet storm about to be unleashed. Adjusting his glasses and surveying the courtroom, he began with a hint of irony. "Mr. Van Dyke, you have chosen to represent yourself. I trust you understand that our proceedings are governed by strict rules and not the loose scripts of a Hollywood set?" A ripple of laughter and murmurs passed through the gallery. Carson Knight's eyes glinted with condescension as he leaned forward, expecting to witness the typical fumbling of a self-represented litigant. Dick merely smiled, a subtle, knowing grin that suggested he had long prepared for this moment. With a measured calm that seemed to hush the entire room, he replied, "Your Honor, I know the rules, and more importantly, I know what's right." Reaching into a well-worn leather briefcase, he produced a neatly organized stack of documents. "Over the past several months, I have pored over every relevant property law and local zoning ordinance that applies to my case. I have meticulously gathered evidence showing that my property, the very soul of my home in Bayview Cove, has been unlawfully encroached upon by Mr. Marshall's development." His voice, deep and resonant, carried not only legal certainty but also the weight of personal loss and hard-won triumph. Judge Brooks arched an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "And where did you acquire such legal knowledge, Mr. Van Dyke?" he asked, his tone a mix of skepticism and genuine curiosity. The courtroom chuckled again, but Dick's calm expression never wavered. "I learned by doing, studying, and most importantly, by living. I'm not an attorney, but I do understand that justice is the cornerstone of our society." With that, the stage was set. In the days that followed, the trial unfolded like a masterfully directed film, a blend of courtroom theatrics, emotional revelations, and unexpected twists that sent ripples through every spectator in the room. Dick Van Dyke took the stand to deliver his opening statement, not as an actor reciting a scripted monologue, but as a man who had spent a lifetime fighting for fairness. "In my heart," he began, "Bayview Cove is more than just land. It is a piece of my history, a place where memories were forged in the salt air and ocean breeze. When Mr. Marshall's company began constructing luxury condos that infringed upon what I had bought fairly and squarely. I knew I could not stand by and allow injustice to prevail. His opening statement resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom had seen firsthand how corporations had gradually eroded the charm of their beloved town. As Dick presented detailed aerial photographs, images that vividly contrasted the untouched beauty of his property with the invasive spread of construction, his evidence spoke for itself. Each image was annotated with precise measurements, each document a testament to his unyielding commitment to the truth. These photos, he explained, are not mere snapshots. They are records of a slow, deliberate process of encroachment, a story of land being taken bit by bit. His words painted a picture of loss, betrayal, and, ultimately, a fierce determination to reclaim what was rightfully his. Not everyone in the courtroom was ready to believe that a movie icon could so adeptly handle the complexities of property law. Carson Knight, Victor Marshall's attorney, stood up to interject, his tone laced with patronizing amusement. "Mr. Van Dyke, while your dedication is admirable, legal disputes such as these are rarely so clear-cut. They are riddled with complexities that demand professional expertise." With a dismissive wave, he added, "Perhaps you should consider hiring a lawyer rather than relying on your Hollywood charm." The courtroom's laughter quickly filled the air, but Dick's eyes remained focused, steady and unyielding. Rising from his seat with the quiet dignity of a seasoned fighter, Dick continued, "I have considered every nuance of this case, and my evidence is irrefutable. When a man stands up for his property, he stands up for the principle that no one is above the law, no matter how powerful they think they are." His tone was laced with both sorrow for what had been lost and the quiet triumph of a man who refused to be bullied by corporate might. His words transcended legal technicalities, striking at the core of American ideals, the right to defend one's home and the inherent dignity of every individual. Over the course of the trial, the proceedings shifted from a predictable courtroom performance to an intense and personal battle between justice and corruption. Witness after witness was called. Samuel Reynolds, a retired land surveyor with decades of experience, took the stand. With a gravitas born of years of service to the community, Samuel confirmed that the property deed and survey records were unequivocal. Dick's land had been documented since he first acquired it, its boundaries clear and unaltered by the passage of time. Samuel's testimony was followed by Thomas Whitaker, a senior land assessor whose calm, measured voice lent credibility to the evidence. Despite attempts by Carson Knight to cast doubt, both witnesses reinforced the notion that there was nothing ambiguous about the property lines and that the development had indeed trespassed. The defense, growing increasingly desperate, attempted to shift the narrative. Carson Knight argued that misunderstandings over boundary lines were common, even suggesting that perhaps Dick's interpretation of the law was overly simplistic. "In the world of property," he intoned, "things are rarely as black and white as you make them seem, Mr. Van Dyke." Yet every time he tried to sow seeds of doubt, Dick countered with unwavering facts, photographs, official letters, and even copies of cease and desist notices that had been ignored by Victor Marshall's team. In one particularly charged moment, Dick confronted Victor Marshall directly on the stand. "Mr. Marshall," he said slowly, voice resonating through the hushed courtroom, "you testified that you believed your project was in full compliance. Yet my documents show clearly that your construction has crept over my legal boundary. Is it not true that you, with full knowledge, allowed your company to build on land that does not belong to you?" The silence that followed was palpable, a heavy pause filled with the weight of truth. As the trial wore on, the courtroom became a crucible for emotions. Dick Van Dyke's transformation from a gentle, reserved property owner to a passionate crusader for justice was on full display. His calm, measured questions during cross-examinations exposed inconsistencies in the defense's arguments, and even Carson Knight's condescending facade began to crumble. In one of the trial's most dramatic moments, A surprise witness, a construction foreman named Alejandro Alvarez, stepped forward. Alejandro, a man whose weathered face told the story of decades working under the unforgiving sun, revealed that he had discovered not one, but two sets of construction plans. The second set, which had never been officially filed, included modifications designed specifically to extend Victor Marshall's project into Dyke's property. With a trembling voice that belied his long years of experience, Alejandro confessed, "I realized I couldn't be part of a cover-up any longer." His revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom, leaving even the defense scrambling to find a counter-argument. The jury, which had been initially skeptical of Dyke's self-representation, began to see the case in a new light. His relentless presentation of evidence, the original blueprints, aerial images showing the land before and after the unauthorized construction, and the damning email correspondence between representatives, built an airtight case that resonated with the deep-seated sense of fairness in every juror's heart. In a moment that was equal parts raw and transcendent, Dyke addressed the jury directly, his voice imbued with both vulnerability and quiet strength. "I have spent my life in front of cameras, portraying characters who fought against injustice. But today, I stand before you not as a movie star, but as a man who believes that when greed tramples on a person's rights, that person must rise and fight back. This isn't about theatrics. It's about protecting our way of life." His words stirred something deep within the assembled jurors, many of whom had seen the consequences of unchecked corporate power in their own communities. Throughout the trial, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted steadily from amusement and casual skepticism to a charged mixture of anger, sympathy, and ultimately respect. Judge Harrison Brooks, once skeptical of Dyke's decision to represent himself, found his earlier assumptions gradually eroded. At one point, after a particularly powerful exchange between Dyke and Carson Knight, Judge Brooks admitted softly, "I underestimated you, Mr. Van Dyke. It appears that you have not only prepared your case, but have also won the hearts and minds of those here." That acknowledgement, though brief, sent a ripple of approval through the courtroom, and even Carson Knight's smug smile faltered for a moment. The final day of the trial arrived with an air of expectancy so thick it was almost tangible. As both sides delivered their closing arguments, the tension was at its peak. Carson Knight, his voice strained and forced, reminded the jury that legal disputes were rarely as clear-cut as Dyke's evidence might suggest. "While Mr. Van Dyke has presented a passionate case, the law is a complex tapestry woven from years of legal precedents and expert interpretations. Passion alone does not define ownership." He finished with a flourish, hoping that his rehearsed rhetoric might overshadow the damning documents and testimonies. Dyke, on the other hand, stepped forward with quiet, unyielding conviction. Standing before the jury with his hands clasped, he spoke slowly, each word deliberate and heavy with meaning. "I don't have a fancy speech or legal jargon to dazzle you," he began. "All I have is the simple truth that I purchased this land fair and square. I worked for every inch of it, and now someone has tried to steal it away piece by piece. This case isn't just about property. It's about respect, about doing what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you." His gaze swept the room, meeting the eyes of each juror as if challenging them to see beyond the technicalities and into the heart of his struggle. "When the truth is on your side, you do not need to fight dirty. You only need to stand your ground." After a long and emotionally charged recess, during which the jury deliberated in near silence, the courtroom reconvened. The air was electric with anticipation as Judge Brooks called the room to order. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the jury foreman, a composed, middle-aged woman with a calm demeanor, stepped forward carrying a manila envelope. With measured steps and an air of solemn duty, she delivered the verdict to the judge's bench. Judge Brooks read aloud in a voice that resonated with the authority of justice itself. "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Dyke Van Dyke. We determine that the defendant, Victor Marshall, and his development corporation have knowingly encroached upon the plaintiff's property and acted in bad faith. Accordingly, the plaintiff is awarded full compensation for the damages incurred, along with additional punitive damages for the willful disregard of property law. A stunned silence descended upon the courtroom. For a long moment, no one moved or spoke. Then, gradually, whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Reporters scrambled to record every detail as Victor Marshall's face turned ashen. Meanwhile, Dick Van Dyke remained seated, his expression serene, an unspoken testament to the fact that justice had at long last been served. Before the proceedings were formally concluded, Judge Brooks offered Dick a moment to speak. Rising slowly, Dick adjusted his worn fedora and addressed the courtroom in a measured tone that carried both the weight of personal history and the triumph of righteousness. I have spent a lifetime in front of cameras portraying heroes who stand up for what is right, he said. But today I wasn't acting. I was fighting for my home, for the principle that every person deserves justice, regardless of who they are. My land was taken from me not by fate or circumstance, but by the deliberate greed of those who believed they could bend the law to their will. I thank the jury for having the courage to see through the spectacle and recognize the truth. His words, simple yet profound, reverberated in the hearts of everyone present. Judge Brooks concluded the day's proceedings by ordering that the defendant pay the full awarded damages along with the plaintiff's legal fees. With the resounding crack of the gavel, the courtroom erupted into a mix of elation, relief, and subdued chatter. Outside the courthouse, the media swarmed, hungry for quotes and reactions. But Dick Van Dyke, ever the man of quiet dignity, only offered a brief nod before stepping into the sunlight. Amid a flurry of flashing cameras and shouted questions, he calmly stated, "Justice was served today, not because of any Hollywood magic, but because the truth prevailed." In the days that followed, the fallout was swift and far-reaching. Victor Marshall's reputation crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny. His company's stock plummeted, and investors began pulling out. Rumors of further investigations into his past developments spread like wildfire, and it became clear that the trial was not merely a personal victory. It was a resounding statement against the corruption that had long plagued the region. Dick Van Dyke returned to Bayview Cove to reclaim his property. The once noisy construction site had been dismantled under court order, leaving the land pristine and undisturbed as it had been meant to be. As he walked the familiar paths of his property, feeling the cool ocean breeze and the soft murmur of the tide, he encountered an old friend. Judge Harrison Brooks, standing casually by the fence with a gentle smile, greeted him warmly. "I must admit, Mr. Van Dyke, I misjudged you. Your steadfast commitment to justice has been nothing short of inspiring." Dick clasped the judge's hand firmly and replied, "And I appreciate your willingness to recognize that sometimes standing up for what's right means defying expectations." Brooks chuckled, adding, "Not everyone has the courage to fight a battle on their own. Most would have settled and walked away. You, however, reminded us all that sometimes one man's resolve can alter the course of history." Later that day, as Dick sat quietly on the edge of his reclaimed land, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. His eyes scanned the rolling hills and the endless expanse of the ocean, a panorama that now symbolized both the cost of corporate greed and the promise of redemption when truth prevails. In that moment, the American spirit, resilient, bold, and unwavering, was palpable. The courthouse drama, the emotional testimonies, and the hard-fought legal battle had all converged into one undeniable truth. Justice, though sometimes delayed, ultimately finds its way to those who dare to stand against injustice. News outlets heralded the verdict as a landmark moment, a David versus Goliath tale set in the modern age. In cafes and diners across Summit County, people spoke in hushed tones about the day that Dick Van Dyke, a man many had once thought relegated to nostalgic silver screens, redefined what it meant to be a hero. Social media buzzed with hashtags praising his tenacity, while analysts on late-night shows remarked, Who would have thought that Dick Van Dyke would take on corporate America and win? His victory was more than personal. It became a rallying cry for homeowners, small business owners, and everyday citizens fighting against the tide of unchecked power. In a final, heartfelt exchange outside the courthouse, Dick approached Alejandro Alvarez, the construction foreman whose brave testimony had turned the tide. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. Alejandro, still in disbelief at the impact of his own words, replied, "I wasn't sure I had the courage until I saw you standing up there. It made me realize that sometimes you have to risk everything for the truth." Dick smiled gently and added with a wry nod, "It takes guts to do what's right, and sometimes a little Hollywood magic isn't such a bad thing after all." Their brief conversation, laced with mutual respect and a shared commitment to honesty, encapsulated the essence of the trial, a battle where integrity, perseverance, and a willingness to confront corruption paved the way for a brighter future. As the days turned into weeks, the reverberations of the case continued to be felt across Bayview Cove and beyond. Dick Van Dyke's quiet heroism had sparked discussions in town halls, classrooms, and boardrooms alike. People began questioning practices that had long been accepted as the norm, and the trial became a symbol of the power of one individual to effect meaningful change. For Dick, the fight was far from over. Though the courthouse victory marked a turning point, he remained vigilant, determined to safeguard his property and his community from any future encroachments. In the soft glow of an early evening, Dick stood on a weathered wooden porch overlooking the sea. He looked out over the land he had fought so hard to reclaim, his mind filled with memories of the trial and the many emotions it had evoked, from sorrow and loss to hope and joy. "This land," he murmured to himself, "belongs to every one of us who dare to stand up against injustice." In that quiet moment, the legacy of his actions was clear. A steadfast reminder that no matter how powerful the adversary, truth and perseverance would always prevail. And so, the story of Dick Van Dyke's battle for justice became more than a legal victory. It was a testament to the enduring American spirit. It served as a reminder that even in a world where corporate giants often seemed invincible, the courage of a single individual could illuminate the path toward fairness and redemption. With a final tip of his hat, Dick turned and walked inside his modest home, leaving behind a legacy that would inspire generations to come. The echoes of that courtroom drama continue to ripple through Summit County, a constant reminder that when one man stands alone for what is right, his voice can transform a community, challenge the status quo, and ultimately change the world. As long as there are those willing to fight for truth, justice will always have a fighting chance.